Greetings and salutations to all you rock and roll denizens of podcast land. It is time for your favorite rock and roll podcast. It's Friday night. It's episode 153 of The Fortress of Rock here on July the 19th, 2024. I am your humble and gracious host, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. As always, ecstatic, glad beyond belief to have you aboard here, as I am each and every Friday night, as we take this little hour and a half sojourn through the realm of rock and roll, past, present, and future. And as always, we start off with News of the World, our tribute to the late, great Freddie Mercury and Queen. Tour news, moments of silence, basic headlines. We've got it all this week. So let us get into it, shall we? This is kind of last minute news, but we do have a new album coming out from the Smashing Pumpkins. The news just dropped today, from what I could tell. And it's coming out August the 2nd, so only basically 2 weeks away. We're looking at a new album from the Smashing Pumpkins, following up their 3 CD, 3 LP magnum opus, Autumn, which of course we have reviewed here in the past on the Fortress of Rock. This one is called Agori Mori Mi. I hope I got that right, because very tough album title to pronounce. Agori Mori Mi. Again, coming out August the 2nd. Have not seen any releases yet in terms of singles or songs. Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan, they do things their own way, so this really doesn't shock me. Song titles look a little, shall we say, esoteric, to say the least. So, we'll put this one on the slate in the coming weeks and months. I know I was very hard, very cruel on Autumn. I still think it should have been distilled down to one really solid, good LP or CD. So, I'm not sure what we're going to get here from Agori Mori Mi. In the little bit I was able to research on it, Billy Corgan sounds like they are going back in time to the early 90s and going back to their process, their writing process for music from that period, which of course was the heyday of grunge, the heyday of their popularity. So we'll see what happens here. There was supposed to be a 6-part documentary on Netflix about Prince. It's done, it's in the can, it was submitted, but there are so many parties involved, approval needed. There's 2 different factions. We've talked about this in the past on the Fortress. 2 different factions involved when it comes to the estate of Prince. So what happens? Of course, because there's too many people involved, too many chefs in the kitchen, this 6-part Prince documentary for Netflix is DOA. It is done. It is dead in the water. What happened, believe it or not, is the director submitted, such an egregious travesty on his part. Note sarcasm. He submitted 9 hours. He cut it down as best he could. He's got 9 hours, submitted 9 hours. So, okay. If it's still top quality, good stuff, you make the episodes a little longer, or you say, okay, we had it originally in the agreement to do 6 parts, now we'll do 9. I really don't think Netflix would have had a problem with that, but yes, the estates the people that are running, the two factions running the estate of Prince, said that constitutes a breach of contract simply because he submitted more material than he was supposed to. Now, there are other things involved where these two factions running the estate of Prince said that there were exaggerations and factual inaccuracies, and they admit it's really nothing scandalous. But this just sounds to me like a complete and total mess when it comes to who's managing Prince's affairs. So what they did to basically block Netflix, block the director from being able to put this documentary out on Netflix because it was a quote-unquote breach of contract, they stopped any and all music rights for the documentary. So we'd be looking at a documentary with no Prince music. And Netflix admits that effectively killed it. Now, the article I read about this does say there's a little window of opportunity for the parties to resolve this issue. You would think with all this already completed, edited footage, storyline, all put together, there's got to be a way to make this work. There has got to be a way to make this work. But in this world, who knows? Who knows? But for now, we will not be seeing this Prince documentary on Netflix anytime soon. Legendary studio in Los Angeles, and there are many of them out there. The Record Plant, closing after 55 years. Now, nobody's going to give you a hard time if you don't really recognize the name, The Record Plant. You really have to be a die-hard music fan to recognize. People know Muscle Shoals. There are a few record studios, recording studios out there that people recognize, and you might recognize the name of the Record Plant. And there are other branches, other studios out there, but the most famous is the Los Angeles Record Plant. So that is shutting down after 55 years. Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. Hotel California by the Eagles. Appetite for Destruction from Guns N' Roses. Just a few of the classic albums that were recorded at the Record Plant in LA. So this is a pretty significant situation here with the closing of LA's Record Plant studio. Another little bit of rock and roll history falls by the wayside. Then we move on to, and it seems like it's going to be like this every week. Be nice to have a week or two where we didn't have to talk about health issues or the passing of music legends, or at least notable figures. Now, I'm going to report this. I'm not a Radiohead fan, so this will be fairly dispassionate, but Radiohead guitarist Johnny Greenwood here recently had a very serious health issue, an infection that forced him to go into ICU, the intensive care unit. Now he is out of danger. This has affected the tour for The Smile, which is an offshoot of Radiohead. And again, you guys, you Radiohead fans, if you're listening, God bless you. This is not necessarily a safe space for you. But if you're a Radiohead fan or a fan of The Smile, get out there and check on the status of Johnny Greenwood. And again, I believe this pretty much nixes any tour dates that The Smile had set up here in the immediate future. Now, I'm always down for a great, cheesy, yacht rock type song. You guys know this. You got to have some fun in life. For every Metallica album you got in your collection, you got to have a Christopher Cross. You know, for every Van Halen, you've got to have Ambrosia. Not really, but maybe a 10-to-1 or a 15-to-1 ratio would be sufficient. But still, every once in a while, you got to dial it down and take in a cheap, cheesy 70s mid-tempo ballad. Dave Loggins, responsible for one of those songs, Please Come to Boston. Now, if you've never heard that song, if you're part of our younger audience, feel free to search it out and listen to it. But again, keep in mind, this is going to be ultra, ultra sappy, cheesy yacht rock. Okay? But Dave Loggins unfortunately passed away here over the past week. So thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. And then we always like to highlight under the radar people. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it happens when they have died, when they've left us. And such is the case with Eddie Rosenblatt. And you go, Maestro, who is Eddie Rosenblatt? Well, Eddie Rosenblatt was the president of Geffen Records throughout the 80s and well into the 90s. And of course, Geffen Records was established in 1980, so he was the president during their heyday. Geffen Records was a huge, huge label, huge force in music throughout the 80s into the 90s, and I'm just going to skim the surface here. I'm not even going to get close to telling you all the artists, all the performers and the bands that Geffen Records discovered or signed and released some of the greatest albums of those 2 decades. But for our purposes here, Guns N' Roses, Asia, they took up Sammy Hagar in his solo career coming into the 80s. I believe Standing Hampton was the first Sammy Hagar album released on Geffen Records. And there are countless others. Quarter Flash comes to mind. Many, many other either new bands they discovered or veteran performers that they brought into the fold because they felt like there was still plenty of potential for hit albums and hit songs. So, even though most people don't know who Eddie Rosenblatt is, the music world lost a behind-the-scenes giant. Let's put it that way. So thoughts and prayers, of course, to his family and his friends. Now we move on to tour news. And tour news usually has a mix of everything. Good, bad, health news, usually bad, unfortunately. So let's start off there with a couple news items involving older artists where health is getting involved and health is forcing them to shut down any future touring plans. We start off with Rod Argent, of course, leader of the Zombies, then brief success with his own band called Argent, Hold Your Head Up. But Rod Argent was back with the Zombies, but having a stroke recently, he has been forced to retire from touring. And that, by necessity, has forced the Zombies to cancel all tour dates currently on their schedule. So we don't know what the future of the Zombies as far as a touring entity holds. Rod Argent is recovering from his stroke, by all accounts doing very well, but he still will not be able to tour anymore in the future. but does say that that does not mean that studio work with the Zombies is off the table. So we might still get new music from the Zombies with Rod Argent at some point, but he will not be with them if they ever go back out on the road again. And then, of course, we all know the terrible story behind Great White. One of the more successful hair metal bands of the 80s. Awful tragedy at a nightclub. Pyrotechnics set the building on fire. Approximately 100 people died. I don't know the exact number, so right there I'm going to apologize. I'm not trying to show any disrespect. But I remember that news item when it broke. And for true rock and roll fans, that was a heartbreaking, devastating moment in history. And then Great White fractured, split up. Accusations among the band members. A lot of bitterness. So the lead singer, Jack Russell, went off to form his own version of Great White called Jack Russell's Great White. And then Great White went on with a different lead singer. And I have seen both incarnations of Great White. And I will always prefer the original lead singer, 9 times out of 10. But now Jack Russell, again, due to health issues, is going to be retiring immediately from touring. So that means the other version of Great White will be the only version of Great White that we will be able to see live in concert going forward. Now, we have a couple other very odd situations involving tour cancellations, tour date issues, not related to health. The Foo Fighters. And if you have never ever seen the Foo Fighters live, what is wrong with you? You've got to get out and see the Foo Fighters live as soon as humanly possible. That being said, they just started out their U.S. tour July the 17th, and it did not go well. Starting off at Citi Field in New York. New York City, of course. Citi Field, home to the Mets. Foo Fighters are playing a lot of big outdoor stadiums, baseball stadiums, football stadiums, that type of deal. But their first show on this current tour, forced to cut it short. Now, they still played for roughly an hour and 20 minutes. And there are a lot of bands out there that they say, hey, that's it. That's the whole show. So, thank you, good night. But the Foo Fighters are not like that. They are glorious. They are magnificent. That was probably half the show. An hour and 20 minutes was probably half of what they had planned to play at Citi Field. But unfortunately, awful weather moved in. Heavy thunderstorms, lightning. There was no chance that they could come back out and finish their set. Very difficult situation because, again, as I said, most bands, if they played for an hour and 20 minutes, they're not giving out refunds. They're saying, we're sorry, but we can't do anything about it. And they couldn't. What are they supposed to do? Dial up God to change the weather? They, of course, can't do anything about it. It's all about the safety of the band, the safety of the fans. And they did have another show the following night, I believe. So hopefully a lot of the people from that first night were able to get in and see them on the second night. But an inauspicious start for the Foo Fighters 2024 U.S. tour. And then this was probably the big rock and roll headline of the week. I don't necessarily like to delve into politics here on the Fortress of Rock. It happens once in a while. We've talked about Roger Waters in the past, and I've been more than happy to tell Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder and Billy Joe Armstrong to shut up, stop talking about your political views to the people who have paid hundreds of dollars to see you in concert. Because they're a captive audience, you show disrespect to them by forcing political views on them when they came to hear you play music. But I'm sure we'll get back into that diatribe another day. Oh, wait. I guess not. I guess we'll do it now. Tenacious D, Jack Black, Kyle Gass. I had just got tickets a few weeks back to go see them in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I do believe I reported that news here on the Fortress of Rock about a month ago. The Rock the Vote Tour, a handful of college cities. Kalamazoo, of course, home to Western Michigan University. But overseas, in Australia, and we all know what happened this past Saturday. I'm not going to relive that. I'm not going to rehash that. Again, we're not getting into politics per se. But Kyle Gass made a very, very stupid mistake, an idiotic mistake that will probably, I won't say destroy Tenacious D, but will cost them millions and millions of dollars. At a show in Australia, it happened to be Kyle Gass's birthday. Jack Black arranges for some pomp and circumstance and a cake to be brought out. And of course, Jack Black says, "Hey, it's your birthday, buddy. Make a wish." Kyle Gass says, "Don't miss Trump next time." And that was the absolute awful, terrible, most idiotic thing to say in that moment in arguably the history of mankind. Even Jack Black looked shocked initially at Kyle Gass making that comment. Now, the thing that really sickens me and really, really drives a stake through my heart is that Jack Black quickly recovers and acts like, "Hey, it's all okay, buddy. Great, great, awesome. Love that wish." And the crowd laughs and cheers. Brain dead sycophants. Because it doesn't matter what politician you're voting for or you support, that rhetoric is not allowed among normal, decent people. And it makes me sick to my stomach. It makes me heartsick. And Jack Black realized in retrospect that this was the wrong path to go down. Now, I don't know if he's personally cut off Kyle Gass, if they're not talking. I don't believe that. I still think there's wiggle room here. When I say that, here's what I'm getting at. Because of that comment, Tenacious D canceled the rest of their Australia and New Zealand tour dates. Now, Jack Black's statement sounded pretty definitive in that it sounded like they were canceling, Tenacious D was canceling all tour dates, and he said the creative future of the band was up in the air. Now, I'm a cynical human being. I don't trust anybody except for a very, very close circle of friends. And I don't trust Jack Black. So, okay, they canceled the Australia dates. They canceled the New Zealand dates. But I've been checking, and nobody is offering me a refund yet for the Kalamazoo show coming up in late October. Which leads me to believe that Tenacious D will let this simmer, let this mellow out a little bit, and I would not be shocked if late August, early September, they decide we're going to go ahead and play these tour dates at these college towns in the Midwest. And it could be for Joe Biden, it could be for a new Democrat presidential candidate. We know it's not going to be for Donald Trump. We'll see what happens. And of course, check in each and every Friday night here throughout the end of summer into the early fall, and we will keep you updated on the status of the Tenacious D tour. One final thing on this, and again, a really, really sad statement on Tenacious D. A lot of people, as I was doing my research here, doesn't matter if it's Democrats, Republicans, whether it was people close to me, whether it was people on the radio or on television, all said, we love Tenacious D. Everybody loved Tenacious D up to this point. Jack Black was getting a little crazy with his love for Joe Biden, but still people were fine with it until this moment when they crossed the line and they went too far. Way too far. And that's the sad thing. That is the sad, sad thing, is Tenacious D was one of those performers, one of those duos where everybody loved them, regardless of how they were aligned politically. Everybody appreciated the sense of humor, the crude nastiness. Sometimes it went too far, but we were all down with it. And now, just like almost everything else, Tenacious D seems to have found a way to divide us yet again. So congratulations, as I do a golf clap to Kyle Gass and Jack Black for being complete and total idiots and screwing up the latter half of their careers as Tenacious D. We'll see if they make any kind of a recovery from this. Now, in the few minutes we've got left here in News of the World, let's talk about normal tour stuff. And yes, again, the Eagles. The Eagles decided, let's add 4 more dates to our Sphere residency in Las Vegas. So now, January 2025, the Eagles will have 4 more shows added on to their residency at, yes, the Las Vegas Sphere. They keep doing this so piecemeal. I mean, I get the fact there's huge demand, but I think they could have just said, we're going to play 6 months at the Sphere. 6 months. Every weekend. Friday night, Saturday night. Even Sunday night. Throw Sunday in. And they would have sold out each and every show. So I don't understand why they're doing it with this. Here's 4 more shows. Here's 8 more shows. Here's 4 more shows. Just say we're going to do 6 months and be done with it. And stop doing this little ticky-tack, 4 more shows, 8 more shows garbage. If you care about Bob Dylan, and I really don't, yes, we've talked about Bob Dylan and Radiohead in this first segment, which doesn't really make me very happy, but if you're rich enough to go to Las Vegas to the Sphere to see the Eagles, then you're probably rich enough to fly over to Europe to see Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan has tacked on 26 shows to his tour. 26 shows October and November of 2024. in the United Kingdom and Europe. So I will give Bob Dylan credit. The man will tour relentlessly, very little in terms of breaks. Just not my cup of tea. And then finally, figured this was coming. Now, I rip on the Billboard charts all the time, and this is a perfect example of why. Is because the Black Crowes' latest album, Happiness Bastards, had a very inauspicious debut months ago when it was released. Their first new album in well over a decade did not set the world on fire, let's put it that way, in terms of Billboard and how they rate sales and popularity. But you know better, and I know better. This album is a return to form for the Black Crowes. It is stellar. It is fantastic. It is one of the best albums, if not the best album, through the first 7 months of 2024. So they've tacked on some more tour dates. Now, they're kind of working around their Aerosmith support dates as well. So you'll have to get online and look up if they're playing near you, when and where, and if it's with Aerosmith or if they're on their own. What I could find out is it looks like roughly 22 more dates in North America for the Black Crowes, but these stretch from September of 2024 all through into February of 2025. Again, hit and miss between them playing on their own as headliners or supporting Aerosmith. But Black Crowes, one of those bands that I've got on my bucket list. Do want to see them at some point down the road. And that's going to do it for News of the World. Now, as you know, we've switched over to a new recording format, a new recording platform. So we're just going non-stop from one segment to the next. So, keeping with the fact that we just ended talking about tour news, as we head into Breakdown, our tribute to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the late, great Tom Petty, our featured review for this week in Breakdown is a concert. Parti Gras 2.0. So if you'll recall, last summer, and you can go back into the archives, the Fortress of Rock archives, roughly a year ago, when I gave you my review of the first Parti Gras, featuring Bret Michaels, Night Ranger, the mighty, awesome Night Ranger, and of course, we're about a month out from giving you another review, less than a month actually, of Night Ranger live. We had Night Ranger last year at Parti Gras with Bret Michaels along with Jefferson Starship. Then we had Mark McGrath of Sugar Ray, and Steve Augeri, the fifth most popular Journey singer of all time. So this Parti Gras, 2024's edition of Parti Gras, looks so much better. Now, of course, Bret Michaels is your ringleader, your rock and roll ringleader here. But when it was announced, Lou Gramm, original lead singer of Foreigner, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, Don Felder, guitarist from the Eagles, and then a country guy, a best friend, cohort buddy of Bret Michaels, Chris Jansen. Now, me being the naive, ever hopeful person that I am, stop laughing out there, stop laughing. I figured we'd get a pretty equal dose of all five artists. Maybe half an hour apiece. Made sense to me. But again, I should be running everything, but I'm not. So, what we got, well, let me kind of tell you this as I experienced it. We get to the venue. Of course, this all was at Ruoff Music Center down in Noblesville, Indiana, just outside of Indianapolis. One of my favorite haunts to go see a concert, even though they still have never been able to figure out traffic flow out at the end of the night. I don't understand why they make it as hard as they do, but that's an argument for another day. So we get there half an hour before concert start time, settle into our seats. Yes, we're doing seats this year because the lawn thing last year was a disaster, especially for my 58-year-old body. Cannot do the standing up for 4 hours on the lawn or sitting in a creaky lawn chair thing weekend after weekend after weekend. Couldn't do it anymore. So, got seats, which made it so much nicer. Still not paying $150, $200 for the seats right up front, so nice happy medium, a nice compromise. And then my friends and I were all speculating about what we just talked about. We're talking a half an hour for who. I said, of course, and I thought it was pretty easy. It was a softball. Don Felder's going to be the first one out. Chris Janson seems like he's pretty close with Bret Michaels, so you figure he's probably going to play halfway through or maybe play right before Bret Michaels comes out. So I say Don Felder, probably going to come out first, and sure enough, Don Felder comes out, and he does exactly as I expected. Don Felder comes out, plays 7 songs, right around 35 minutes, I would estimate. 7 Eagles hits, and he is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic, even though he really didn't sing lead on some of these songs. He does a great job, very faithful. And of course, he was lead guitarist on these songs, so musically, these songs sound stellar. Absolutely stellar. Set list for Don Felder back on July the 12th, last Friday night, at the Ruoff Music Center was Already Gone, One of These Nights, 7 Bridges Road, Take It Easy, Heartache Tonight, which seemed to be the most popular of all the songs, Life in the Fast Lane, and then he closed it out, of course, with Hotel California, bringing out his double neck guitar. And it was great. It was absolutely great. This was exactly the start that I was hoping for. So kudos to Don Felder, but the problem was one of my friends happened to call up a Facebook page. There are certain groups of fans we discovered last year, like the Lawn People, have their own Facebook page, their Facebook group for those who get lawn passes like we had last year. And they post what they have heard is the rundown for the rest of the evening. And all it shows is Chris Janson is up next after Don Felder. Chris Janson will play for approximately 50 minutes, and then Bret Michaels plays for about an hour and 15 minutes. And all of us look at each other, where's Lou Gramm? Where's Dee Snider? And then we realize, oh, geez, they're going to do the same thing they did last year with Mark McGrath and with Steve Augeri, and they're going to bring them out during Bret Michaels' set to play a couple songs, which, let's put it this way, initially I thought was absolute garbage, because Steve Augeri and Mark McGrath can't hold Lou Gramm and Dee Snider's jock straps. Okay, we're talking about 2 rock and roll legends. One's going into the Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and one, I can make a case, should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Steve Augeri and Mark McGrath will never even be allowed to walk into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as visitors. Well, I'm joking, but you know what I mean. Let alone get inducted at any point in time into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I felt like this was a little bit of disrespect for Lou Gramm and Dee Snider. So I decided to take it easy. Thank you, Mr. Felder. Decided to take it easy during Chris Jansen's set. I listened to it, but I also got up, walked around, went to the bathroom, looked at t-shirts, talked to a couple people. I got maybe a third to a half of Chris Jansen's set. I'm not going to break that down for you. We really don't do country music here. I will give him credit. I mean, he's younger, so he had a lot more energy. He played snippets of Purple Rain and Will the Circle Be Unbroken, along with some of his own hits. But again, I understand he and Bret Michaels have a TV show together and they're great friends, but just seemed to be an odd fit for this group of performers. He seemed like the odd man out. So then Bret Michaels comes on. And yes, we get the necessary Poison songs right off the bat. As Bret Michaels comes out, opens up his set with Talk Dirty to Me, Ride the Wind, and Your Mama Don't Dance. I'm okay with the first one. The other two, I don't need to hear ever again in my life live in concert. I have seen between Poison and Bret Michaels solo, I've seen them enough. I want to say this was the seventh or eighth time I've seen Bret Michaels either solo or with Poison. I'm done. I love Poison, but they never change the set list. They play the same songs every show. Again, whether it's him solo or with the band, just don't need it anymore. And plus, Your Mama Don't Dance isn't that good. And I honestly don't think Ride the Wind is all that great either. Then we get the first break. As we suspected, Lou Gramm comes out. And Lou Gramm sings what I would say are Foreigner's three biggest hits. So Lou Gramm plays Cold as Ice, Hot Blooded, and Jukebox Hero. Now, here is where I will say maybe the organizers, I will give credit, I guess, to Bret Michaels. I'm sure he has a say in this. I don't think Lou Gramm could have pulled off any more than those three songs. I'm not going to say he was straining. He was good. He was solid. It was great to see him for the first time ever. But by the end of Jukebox Hero, you could kind of tell that was all he had in him. If they'd gone another song, it could have been really bad. Let's put it that way. So Lou Gramm gets three Foreigner classics. Bret Michaels comes back out again. Something to Believe In, of course. A good song, very good song, but the thing is, Bret Michaels has always made that song about honoring the military and first responders, so have to give him 100%, 110% credit for what he does with that song and the recognition he passes along to the true heroes in our society. So I will never disparage him or that song. Then, of course, we go right into more Poison debauchery with Unskinny Bop, one of my personal favorites. And then Fallen Angel. I do like Fallen Angel. So, three more Poison songs, and then Dee Snider comes out. So you can see the pattern here. Dee Snider comes out, and I'll tell you what, the highlight of the night, Dee Snider, that man, I don't want to say at his advanced age, but he is older than me, significantly older than me. And I'm telling you, he is in phenomenal shape. He has got such an energy level, a ridiculous level of energy to spare. And I'm going to compare him to Lou Gramm here in just a second, once we cover his 3-song set. So, of course, Dee Snider comes out with We're Not Gonna Take It. And then, of course, I Wanna Rock. And then, instead of pulling a third Twisted Sister song out of his hat, we get his cover of Highway to Hell. Now, as opposed to Lou Gramm, where I was worried Lou Gramm just didn't, at his age, have the energy to go beyond 3 songs or the voice, Dee Snider, over his 3 songs, expended so much energy and almost shredded his vocal cords to the point where I don't think he could have done another song. Almost a 180 from Lou Gramm. This was not because he couldn't, due to being old and not quite having the rock and roll chops anymore. It was because he just blew out his engine over 3 songs, gave you everything, 110%, emptied the tank over 3 songs, and that was all he had. So kudos to him. Definite highlight of the night, the 3-song set from Dee Snider. And then, what is customary, it seems like it's only been 2 years, but customary ending for Parti Gras is Bret Michaels comes out one last time, plays Every Rose Has Its Thorn, where he did bring out in this case a local musician, a young girl, to play guitar along with him during the song, and then closes out. Now last year with Night Ranger and Jefferson Starship and everybody came on stage, and I believe they did Lynyrd Skynyrd's Sweet Home Alabama. Now this year they closed everything out with a Poison song. They closed out with, of course, Nothing But a Good Time. The thing that was interesting to note was that Dee Snider, of course, came out and was basically splitting vocal time at the end with Bret Michaels. Lou Gramm, nowhere to be found. Now, Chris Janson came out. I believe he'd come out earlier for Your Mama Don't Dance. He might have played harmonica, I think, a little bit. I think he and Bret Michaels were doing dueling harmonicas early in this set. And then he came out for the end. But Lou Gramm, nowhere to be found. Don Felder, nowhere to be found. So the old guys, for the most part, stayed in the back for this one. And so that was it. They closed it out with Nothing But a Good Time. So even though I initially was going to have issues not enjoying the way they'd set this up, basically buying the tickets to specifically see Lou Gramm and Dee Snider, at the end of the night I looked at it and I said, okay, I understand what they were doing. Obviously smarter people than me are in charge of this, because they knew that Lou Gramm wasn't going to be able to really put on more than a 3-song set, and Dee Snider was just going to go, pardon my French, balls to the wall for 15 minutes and expend all of his energy. So they pretty much ended up being right in how they set this up. I'm still a little disappointed, still a little bitter. If I'd known they were going to do this, would I have still bought tickets? I tell you what, it's 50-50. I don't know. If they'd have told me ahead of time that I was only going to get 3 songs from Lou Gramm and 3 songs from Dee Snider, now the half hour plus from Don Felder, very solid as well. But as I said, if I think the linchpin here, the key factor is, if you have never seen Bret Michaels or Poison before, this was a much more appealing show. This is definitely a much better show for somebody who's more of a novice when it comes to Bret Michaels or Poison. But for me, because I've just seen him so many times doing the same songs over and over and over again, the Lou Gramm, Dee Snider factor kind of lowered my enthusiasm at the end of the night about the show I'd just seen. But it was still good. It was still a good show. I don't have any regrets about going. Enjoyed myself very much. Worth it to at least see Lou Gramm perform a couple songs, see Dee Snider go absolutely crazy for a 15-minute set, and crazy in a good way. So, if you get a chance, I know this is not a huge extensive tour. I don't even know how many dates are left, maybe 8 or 10, and I'm just really giving you a rough estimate. This is, again, not a long, extensive tour, but definitely if you have not seen Bret Michaels or Poison, check this out. If you have, then it's up to you. It's really up to you. If it's convenient, if it's easy, close by, you can get tickets for a decent price, then I would say go for it. But I have forewarned you, especially you old school fans like me, when it comes to Foreigner or Twisted Sister, you're not going to get a lot of what you would expect normally when you first see this lineup. So that is going to be it for Breakdown. And I have mentioned to you over the past month or so, now we're getting into the big time concert season here on the Fortress of Rock. We are pretty much going to have concert reviews almost every week, all the way through deep into September and even into October. There will be an occasional week like next week where we will go back to reviewing a song or two or a new album, but for the most part it's going to be concerts, and more concerts for the next couple months, kids, and I cannot wait to share my reviews with you on all this great live music coming up here for the rest of the summer of 2024 and into the fall. All right, everybody, so now we shuffle along with no breaks from Breakdown to I Want to Go Back. Of course, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money, which means I have made my way from the Fortress of Rock studios into the garage, get into the seat next to Doc Brown in the Rock and Roll DeLorean. We get this sucker fired up to 1.21 gigawatts, and we take you into the rock and roll time stream, as we do each and every week, to look back at anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, and moments in rock and roll history. But as we get the engine warmed up, we get all the dials in the right direction. That's all on Doc Brown. My job here is to take care of some business. I know I have to do it each and every week, and I apologize, but it's necessary because we have to give credit to all the people. The podcast platforms are sources that help us out each and every week. So first up, three main sources for the ideas, the stories that you hear in segment 1, News of the World, and here in segment 3, I Want to Go Back. A lot of them, not all of them, but the main sources for most of those stories come from UltimateClassicRock.com, ThisDayInMusic.com, and the mighty, don't put mighty in your web browser, the mighty VanHalenNewsDesk.com. And then, of course, you are listening to us somewhere, so you know at least one of the sources, one of the platforms where you can find the Fortress of Rock each and every Friday night. But you have options and choices. We all need options and choices in life. Aren't they great? You can listen to the Fortress of Rock each and every Friday night on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox, and Audible. And then, of course, don't forget to check out the Facebook page. As this episode drops Friday night, so does the Weekend Rock Project. And we're still doing the whole mess with pronouns. I was getting into arguments the first weekend about pronouns, and there are so many of them. I split this up into 4 different weekends. We're on weekend 3 right now. This is all about I hate to take you back to English class, but this is all about the third person singular pronouns, he, she, and all of that good stuff. So very, very, very many options out there, a ton. Thousands of options out there of good songs, great songs in the rock and roll canon that you can pick from. And I put out there, of course, to start things off, I put out Van Halen's She's the Woman off their final album, A Different Kind of Truth, and the most underrated, in my opinion, solo rock artist of all time. There are some out there who will argue. They have their own personal favorites, and that's fine. But mine is Billy Squier. He, of course, was the first rock concert headliner I ever saw. So I picked She Goes Down. So feel free to jump on to the Facebook page for the Fortress of Rock and throw out your selections, your choices. The one thing I would ask is don't just throw songs out there just to do it. At the same time, I'm not saying you have to sit there and overthink it and stress about it. What is the one great song that's got he or she in it? And don't do that either. Do like I did. Just pick the first couple that pop into your head from the artists that you really love. Get those out there. That's really the heart and soul of what we try to do each and every weekend with the Weekend Rock Project. And then this coming Sunday afternoon will be New Music Sunday, where I will throw out a video from YouTube, either fully produced or a lyric video or a visualizer of a relatively new song, something that you guys should probably listen to because there's such a lack of new music out there. I have an idea for what I want to do this Sunday, but I have already scanned YouTube in preparation, and let's just put it this way, the video that's out there is basically lame. It's a still shot for 3.5 minutes, so I don't know if I want to do that to you. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Still got a couple days to play with, but be sure to check out the Facebook page, The Fortress of Rock, this Sunday for New Music Sunday. So let us get into birthdays and anniversaries here for July the 19th. Let's knock birthdays out right off the bat. Just a few, but very significant birthdays in the history of rock and roll. Born on this day, July the 19th, 1952. Alan Collins. Of course, Alan Collins, guitarist for Lynyrd Skynyrd. And yes, he was on that plane. That fatal plane crash where we saw multiple members of the band lose their lives. Now, we talked about that here recently with Steve Gaines and Cassie Gaines. Now, Alan Collins survived. He did have severe damage to one of his arms, but he recovered. But of course, after that crash, Lynyrd Skynyrd broke up. And then a lot of people, I'm shocked, still don't remember this band. But he and Gary Rosington, also of Lynyrd Skynyrd, got together since at the time it looked like Skynyrd was no more. And they put together the Rosington Collins Band. And they put out a couple solid albums. And then, of course, Alan Collins did not have a good life. And some of it was partially his own fault. but a lot of car accidents. If you want to do a deep dive into the awful, tragic life of Alan Collins, feel free. But we're here to celebrate his birthday and his music. Born on this day in 1952, Alan Collins, guitarist for Lynyrd Skynyrd and the Rossington Collins Band. Born on this day, July the 19th, 1947, Bernie Leadon. Bernie Leadon, guitarist and original member of the Eagles. Now, dare I say, he might go down in history as the least recognizable member of the Eagles. Some would probably say Timothy B. Schmidt, but he's still with them to this day. Bernie Leadon was only with the Eagles from 1971 until late 1975. But he was with the band during their formative years and through some of their greatest albums and songs. So do not discount Bernie Leadon as a rock and roll legend, born on this day in 1947. And speaking of rock and roll Hall of Famers, because yes, I believe Bernie Leadon was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Eagles. Now we bring out the big guns. Born on the same day as Bernie Leadon, July the 19th, 1947, guitarist for one of the most popular groups of all time, Queen. Of course, we dedicate segment 1, News of the World, to Freddie Mercury and Queen. An extremely smart, brilliant man. I mean, this guy is a genius, and I'm not using that word lightly, and I'm not just talking about how he plays a guitar. Brian May, guitarist for Queen, born on this day in 1947, along with Bernie Leadon of the Eagles. Pretty significant day for birthdays. Pretty significant year also, 1947. And then finally, born on this day, July the 19th, 1931, Thomas Papa D. Allen, percussionist for War. And now, of course, doing my research for this episode. And again, I've told you guys occasionally, one of the great things about doing the Fortress of Rock is I get to do the research. When I see a good idea, whether it comes from a story in News of the World or here, an anniversary or a birthday, and I want to go back, I like to dig in if I'm not 110% sure of the subject matter, the performer, the band. And War was a heck of a lot more popular than I really remember. Now, they were just before my time. They were really popular, really big, right when I was just starting to get into music in 1975, 1976, 77. But looking at some of the sales figures for them, some of their songs, now of course I remember their most popular songs, but the level of popularity that War reached back in the early and mid-70s is pretty impressive. So percussionist for War, Thomas Papa D. Allen, born on this day in 1931. And that takes us into anniversaries. July the 19th, 2010. Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi settle a dispute that ended up heading into the courts about who owned the Black Sabbath name. So this was like a trademark dispute between arguably the two most important members of Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi, but they settled it, seems like fairly amicably, because of course then they got back together years later to reform Black Sabbath. this is an interesting one, and I've got two or three interesting anniversaries that I kind of went a little bit off the straight and narrow for. You know, I'm not just going to talk about this was the number one song, this was the number one album. So this one, I'm delving throughout this entire episode into areas and bands and performers that I necessarily don't like. So I've already talked about Radiohead. I've already talked about Bob Dylan. So now, July the 19th, 1993, let's talk about Rage Against the Machine. But I will tell you this, even though I'm not a Rage fan, this moment in rock and roll history, 100% behind them, with them. This was a big time, ballsy move on their part. And when I tell you what happened, that term takes on added meaning. And this, again, is one of those moments that, doing research, I'd either forgotten about or I did not know about at all. And maybe it didn't get a lot of coverage in the mainstream media. But on this day, July the 19th, 1993, Rage Against the Machine came on stage naked at Lollapalooza, I believe in Philadelphia. Nothing on except black electrician's tape, I believe, taped across their mouths, and the words PMRC written on their chests. They were allotted 15 minutes, and that's all they did was stand there silent and naked for 15 minutes during Lollapalooza back on this day in 1993. And I will again say I am not a huge fan of Rage Against the Machine, but in this particular case, when it comes to the PMRC and Tipper Gore, 150% behind them. Now, I will point out, before we move on, the hypocrisy. I mentioned this earlier in the show. I don't like to delve into politics, but this obviously is screaming for me to make a comment about politics. I want to talk about hypocrisy for just a minute. I want to talk about the Democratic Party and their hypocrisy, especially Hollywood Democrats and musicians who are staunch Democrats. And then I want you to think about that, and you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the aforementioned Eddie Vedder and Bruce Springsteen. I'm talking about actors like Robert De Niro and Bette Midler. These people are supposedly, the actors and the performers, the staunch defenders of the First Amendment. Yet they love, without equivocation, any Democratic candidate that's put before them. But now we get Rage Against the Machine in 1993 protesting, which I agree with completely, protesting censorship from the Democratic wife of a man who would end up running for president on the Democratic ticket. Just think about that. Think about the hypocrisy of that. And good for Rage Against the Machine to expose the fraudulent nature of the Democratic Party and politics as a whole. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, do not trust anybody in politics, in government, because this is the kind of garbage they will pull on you. They will act like they're there their party protects your freedoms. Their party is there to look out for you from birth till death. And then they'll be hypocrites and turn around and try to censor free speech. While all the while, actors and performers who push the boundaries when it comes to sexuality and language, all of a sudden now, no, we've got to protect the children. Now all of a sudden it takes a complete 180. Hypocrites. And you guys know this is not the first time I've covered this ground, this territory. Tipper Gore and her husband, garbage. Absolute garbage. And what they put Dee Snider through, what they put Rob Halford through, Blackie Lawless. Change the channel. Turn the volume off. Turn it down. That's all you have to do if you don't like what's on the TV or what's on the radio. That's all you have to do. Yet some people think their power enables them to dictate what people should be allowed to perform, write, and say. And I will, again, you might not believe it, but I am always going to say I am 100% staunchly for the First Amendment. Even though I don't curse on this podcast, believe me, not a day goes by where I'm not dropping an F-bomb or two. I keep this podcast clean because I want the kids to be able to listen to it, and I don't want the parents to be stressed out any more than they have to be in their regular life, because I know what it's like. But that doesn't mean that I am supporting the PMRC or the ideals behind that from 2 decades ago with Tipper Gore. All right, moving on. July the 19th, 1986. Number 1 U.S. single. Yeah, see how we did that? We're right back to what we would normally do. The number 1 U.S. single on this day in 1986 was Genesis, Invisible Touch. And the funny thing about this, a little bit of rock and roll irony, the number 2 song on the U.S. charts, Sledgehammer. Yes, by Peter Gabriel, former frontman for Genesis. Kind of interesting. Now, we'll be talking a lot next week about Deep Purple. But for our purposes here, July the 19th, 1976, the Mark IV lineup of Deep Purple broke up on this day, July the 19th. That, of course, featured David Coverdale. And the interesting sidebar to this is that this would lead to David Coverdale going off on his own and forming Whitesnake. On this day, July the 19th, 1975, big day for Paul McCartney and Wings. Not only did they have the number 1 U.S. album on this day, which was Venus and Mars, but they also had the number 1 single, one of my favorite songs from the 70s, one of the top 3 songs, in my humble opinion, that Paul McCartney and Wings ever put out. Listen to What the Man Said was the number 1 song in the U.S. on this day in 1975. On this day in 1974, July the 19th, the Ozark Music Festival was going on. Now, it stretched over 3 days in Missouri. Huge crowd, approximately over 3 days, about 350,000 people attended this music festival. And I will only give you a little taste of some of the artists that appeared, but I'm telling you, this is another one of those research moments where I looked at it and, wow, why didn't this get nearly the attention of the Monterey Pop Festival or Woodstock? Some of the biggest names that were at the Ozark Music Festival: Bachman Turner Overdrive, the Eagles, Leonard Skinner, Ted Nugent, and Aerosmith. And I'm telling you, I'm barely scratching the surface. So again, on this day in 1974, the Ozark Music Festival was going on in Missouri. Another little fun, off the beaten path kind of historical rock and roll tidbit for you. July the 19th, 1969. You know I love the Monkees. You know I love the Monkees. The Monkees on this day in 1969 appear on Johnny Cash's ABC variety show. Very wild. Very, very wild. And it sounded like this is something I might have to try to dig up on YouTube, because everything is on YouTube, of course, now. But it sounds unbelievably cool in that Johnny Cash, by introducing the Monkees, sang the first verse of Last Train to Clarksville. That's what I got to see. I got to see Johnny Cash singing the first verse of Last Train to Clarksville, and then the Monkees coming in to finish their classic song up. And then I guess at another point in the show, they sang us one of his songs, one of Johnny Cash's songs with him. So hopefully that's out there somewhere in the YouTube archives. And then finally, on this day, July the 19th, 1954. Now keep this in mind. Last week on July the 12th, when we were talking about anniversaries in rock and roll history, we talked about the fact that in 1954, a 19-year-old lad named Elvis Presley signed a recording contract with Sun Records. That was last week. So, 1 week later to the day, on the same year, 1954, Sun Records released the first ever single from that young lad, Elvis Presley, the song, That's All Right. So it took 1 week between signing Elvis Presley to a contract and getting his first song out there for Sun Records. Very, very interesting, very cool. A lot of very interesting anniversaries and birthdays this week in I Want to Go Back. I look to my left and I have to say, even Doc Brown seems pretty impressed with the lineup we just had this week for I Want to Go Back. Some very interesting and very significant birthdays and anniversaries. But we're going to have to pull the rock and roll DeLorean back into the garage here at the Fortress of Rock, pull up the drawbridge over the moat, start shutting things down, but you know we are not done quite yet. One final segment left here as I climb out of the rock and roll DeLorean, head back to the studio as we go nonstop with our new format. We go from segment 3 to segment 4. It is time, in the words of the fabulous Thunderbirds, to wrap it up. Alright, so I like to jumble things up here in the last segment. There's really 3 main parts to this. You know this by now. Let's start off with our tribute to the Billboard charts. The good Billboard charts back in the 70s and the 80s, when they actually did a fairly good job of recording and reporting the most popular songs and albums each and every week. And of course, that goes hand in hand with Casey Kasem and America's Top 40. So we started doing this here at the beginning of 2024. I love doing it. I hope you do. So we'll keep it going just to give you a little bit of insight into my rock and roll brain. And again, tying it into my love for what the Billboard charts used to be. And I think I've told you this story once or twice, but I was the kid who would go with his mom back in the late 70s and the early 80s to the grocery store or to the mall. And when we were in the bookstore, in the mall, or in the grocery store, I would gravitate to the magazine rack and I would pore through the Billboard magazine. I mean, that magazine, even back then, was ungodly expensive. So you couldn't buy one. You basically had to sit there and read it in a store. I think now, I'm just guessing, just an estimate. I would guess now a copy of Billboard magazine probably costs somewhere between $10 and $15. And even back then, I think it was 7 or 8. And back in the 70s and the 80s, that was pretty expensive for a magazine. But I would always read it with wonder, following every week where my favorite songs and favorite albums were. Be disappointed if they weren't doing well. Be very happy if they were in the top 10 or number 1. So, we have not had, as I've been mentioning over the last month, we have not had a lot of new albums come out. Now, we're going to fix that next week. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I've been kind of going back, listening to albums that have come out here earlier in 2024. And this week, I went back and listened to the latest album from Sebastian Bach. So that will be my number 1 album this week here on the Fortress of Rock. Sebastian Bach's Child Within the Man. That's our number 1 album here. And then, as always, I cheat when it comes to the top songs. Always try to pick 2. Usually a lot more to choose from when it comes to songs, obviously, as opposed to albums. One album has at least 10 songs, if not more. You can do the math. And yes, for the 6th week in a row, what can I say? I love the song. I'm going to qualify this by telling you, even though this song has been one of the top songs here on the Fortress of Rock for 6 straight weeks, that does not mean in any way, shape, or form it will end up being the top song of the year. Right now, it's just kind of a dull point. There's not a lot of competition. Let's put it that way. But it's still a great song. Myles Kennedy's Say What You Will. 6th week in a row as one of our top songs here on the Fortress of Rock. And this one slides in at the last possible minute. And once again, kind of a factor being that it's kind of weak when it comes to a lot of new music, a lot of new songs being out there. There is a new song just released within the last day or two by Soul Asylum. And I am a huge Soul Asylum fan. Going to be seeing them in concert later on this year in the early fall with STP, Stone Temple Pilots, and live. Soul Asylum, there's no word on a new album yet. This is just right now a one-off single. But there is a brand new song from Soul Asylum called High Road that will share honors with Myles Kennedy this week as one of the top songs here on the Fortress of Rock. So, to recap one last time, top album, Sebastian Bach's Child Within the Man. Top songs, Myles Kennedy's Say What You Will, and Soul Asylum's High Road. And that segue takes us into the songs and the albums, not officially, unofficially, we're kind of looking at reviewing over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Of course, that would include Soul Asylum's brand new song, High Road. I would say probably in 2 weeks, you'll have that review. Now, I listened to it a lot today. The first day I had access to it here on Friday, July the 19th. That's why it was able to sneak in at the last second to be one of the top songs of the week. But I think I'm going to need at least 2 weeks to really fully give you a knowledgeable comprehensive review. There's an outside chance we'll do it next week. How about that? I'd say 50-50. It's either going to be next week in episode 154 or the week after, episode 155 for sure. So we've got new stuff from Soul Asylum, High Road. We've also got new stuff from Seether. Seether's got a new album coming out. The first single off of that is Judas Mind. So we'll have that for you. That will probably be next week. And then one of those smaller bands that I like to try to expose you guys to, names that you don't really know. We talk a lot about the Black Moods, and we talk a lot about Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers. And then lately, a friend of mine got me into the Cold Stairs. And I really liked their last album. They've got a new album coming out. Latest single from that one is Blow, Wind, Blow. So again, I'm looking at that one probably next week as well. And then on the back burner, we're still looking at some point in time, possibly maybe reviewing the 10th album from Mr. Big. Yes, 10. And of course, Mark Knopfler's EP, The Boy. New songs from Hold Steady, Radar and Leda, and The Death of the Punchline, and of course the live Dallas concert that's part of the expanded new edition of Van Halen's For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Now finally, this third part of Wrap It Up, once again our tribute to the Fabulous Thunderbirds, is where we officially, really, kinda, almost set stuff in concrete in terms of what we're going to be doing over the next month or so. So next week, Deep Purple, brand new album, episode 154, dropping on July the 26th. The new album is Equals One. It is out today on July the 19th. We will have our review of that for you next week, the featured review in Breakdown. I've listened to it. So far, so good. One spin, one listen. Very, very good so far. In 2 weeks, the concert train starts rolling again. In 2 weeks, I will have my review in episode 155 on August the 2nd. Of Pat Benatar and her husband, Neil Giraldo, live from Indianapolis, Indiana. Then 3 weeks, episode 156. Kind of tried to clear things up a little bit here. In 3 weeks, I'm going to just stick with one concert. One concert review because it's going to be 4 bands. So I want to give all 4 bands a decent amount of attention here. In episode 156, dropping August the 9th. That is Night Ranger, Jackal, Enough's Enough, and Firehouse, live at the Plymouth Motor Speedway in Indiana. Then, when we get 4 weeks out, things get a little sketchy again. I'm looking at, for episode 157 on August the 16th, double dipping into the concert well. These 2 bands are not performing together, but I will be seeing them within about a week to a week and a half of each other. And they will both be set up to be reviewed on Friday night, August the 16th. Collective Soul in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then Living Colour. Finally get to see Living Colour as a headliner. One of my favorite bands ever. And I've only gotten to see them a couple times as an opening act. Once for Aerosmith, once for Extreme. Now I get to see them as a headliner in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So that might be, in 4 weeks, a double dip concert review for you. Things could change, but that's what I'm planning, because I'm going to go 5 weeks out. Now, we're going to do a little bit more planning for you. 5 weeks out. And I told you the concert stuff coming hard and heavy. So 5 weeks out. That would be episode 158, dropping August the 23rd. The final tour for Lynch Mob. Of course, that features George Lynch, legendary guitarist, most notably from Dokken. But his band, Lynch Mob, on their farewell tour, will have that review for you in 5 weeks on August the 23rd. In 6 weeks, we might go back to album reviews. We mentioned Smashing Pumpkins have a new album coming out August the 2nd. Agori Mori Me. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Kind of, sort of, maybe looking at that being the featured review in 6 weeks. Episode 159 on August the 30th. And then finally, for sure, we'll go 7 weeks out and we'll stop. This is a big one. This is the one concert of all these concerts, the 13 or 14 we have slated this year. This is the one I've been looking forward to the most. This is Sammy Hagar, Michael Anthony, Jason Bonham, Joe Satriani, the Best of All Worlds Tour, the Van Halen Tribute Tour. I know you technically don't want to call it that, but that's really the closest we're going to get. That's what it is. By all accounts, 90% of the set is Van Halen. I've been trying to avoid spoilers, but it's just too hard, because the minute I jump on YouTube to just watch a video of somebody else like Soul Asylum, that was the boring video I mentioned earlier that I wanted to kind of sort of maybe use for New Music Sunday. The video for High Road, their new song. I go on YouTube to try to find that, to see if there's a video yet, and I'm getting all these spoilers from the first nights of the Sammy Hagar Best of All Worlds tour, telling me, oh, they're playing this. Oh, here's a video of this. Oh, here they're playing this. Like, no. I wanted to go in clean and fresh. I don't want to look at a set list. I don't want spoilers. But now I've got spoilers that I didn't want. I will not tell you kids any of them. You can go in fresh. I can't. But I will say that what I've seen so far in terms of spoilers makes me very happy. Let's put it that way. But the review down at the Ruoff Music Center of Sammy Hagar, the Best of All Worlds tour, I will have that for you. Episode 160, dropping September the 6th. So there you go, going all the way out to September with what we're going to be doing here on the Fortress of Rock. Might be some tweaks and some changes to the schedule, but I can tell you for sure the next 3 episodes are set in stone. Once we get to that 4th week with Collective Soul, Living Color, we'll see. I might review one and then push another one back. Push Smashing Pumpkins back. We'll see how it all plays out. But that is it for a jam-packed, extra super long episode of the Fortress of Rock. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did bringing it to you. We'll do it again in 7 days. I am your humble and gracious host, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. You are who you are. You have a great, safe, happy, fun weekend. We'll do it again, like I said, in 7 days. Love the one you're with. Peace out, everybody.